It really is a delight and a pleasure to welcome all of you to the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, especially in this new building. This is the first time we've had the Loper lecture here in this building. It's a small thing that we threw together in a couple of years, but I do hope that you have the opportunity to take a tour of the building, if not this evening, then at some point in the near future. This really is my favorite event of the year. It's an important topic. It's hugely relevant to what's going on in America and in the world. And we also have the most interesting people who speak on our behalf at these sessions and a wonderful audience. And so, as you know, this is the James L. Loper Lecture in Public Service Broadcasting. Very important, and it's the first time that it will have been held in the Wallace Annenberg Hall. I want to send out special greetings, first of all, to Jim's beloved widow, Ms. Mary Lou Loper, and her family, who are here with us this evening. Mary Lou, it's great to see you. Thanks for bringing several generations, and we welcome all of them as well. I also want to welcome Bill Elkus and his family. Bill is a member of the USC Board of Counselors for the Annenberg School. And Bill, if you would raise your hand so people can, and the family right next to you, and please, multi-generational. No, come on, ladies. Wave, there we go. And of course, Corey Berg, who's a member of the USC Alumni Board of Governors and also Annenberg Alumni Advisory Board. So thank you very much for coming, Corey, and for your generous support of the building, both of you. And of course, behind this all is the support and vision of the H. Russell Smith Foundation and its president, Stuart Smith, for making this annual event possible. This is a pretty exciting event, and in the past we've had such illustrious speakers. In fact, over the past couple of years, Guy Raz, who is from NPR, so we are an equal opportunity group. We do radio and television. Guy spoke last year. Tavis Smiley. Before that, and the year before that, it was Judy Woodruff, who is a great contributor to the creation of wonderful news. Now, Jim himself was not only a strong supporter of this school, he was a lecturer in our school. He taught broadcasting for many years, was a great teacher. He also did a few other things, like one of the founders of KCET. So he practiced what he preached, what he taught, and was also a founding chairman of the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS. So he really had an illustrious career and was executive director of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Now, PBS broadcasting and public broadcasting more general is really at the core consists of a radio side and a television side and an online side. But more importantly, whatever the platform, they are a major contributor to democracy in the United States of America. They are the beating heart, if you will, of non-commercial television. And with all due respect, for those of you who've seen commercial television recently, you probably appreciate the importance of non-commercial television. I know this is the golden age in many ways of content, but much of that content is to be found on PBS and NPR, et cetera, and our special guest this evening played a very large part in making sure that the kind of quality that we need is something that we do have. So this evening we'll be featuring two incredibly accomplished people whom you'll meet in just a few moments, Professor Stacy Smith from our faculty and our special guest, Pat Mitchell. And I do want to take a moment here as a sort of privilege of the chair to say something about Pat, who I have known personally and not just professionally. Pat and I worked together in public broadcasting when she was running PBS and I was on the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And this is a woman with big vision. She gets the big picture. She understands the relationship between media and democracy. She also brought to that position amazing experience, which I know that Stacy will talk a bit more about. But she also brought a can-do attitude, which coming from the academy as I did, we don't always have that. And with all due respect, sometimes public broadcasting doesn't always have the can-do spirit that Pat and others have. And I could call up Pat and we could commiserate with one another about the challenges of public broadcasting, which were one or two, to say the least, and its foibles and its challenges. But we could also call up one another and say, what a wonderful institution is public broadcasting. So there are not many people who you could call up and kvetch with, and also call up and just say, we are so lucky to be engaged with public broadcasting. And she is one of the rare people who can do both of those things. So let me just take 2 minutes, if you will permit me, to say this is what we would call a public service announcement. But I will not be passing the hat. I will not be giving out mugs and cups. But what I will do is tell you a little bit about this wonderful school, the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. I'm going to say something about people who come in and people who go out, and then what we do while the students are here. So on the incoming side, we have great students. We really have some of the best students in the university. The average GPA is 3.73 of our students who come into the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. The SAT range is 1960 to 2180, which is not chopped liver. That's pretty good. What gives all of us a great amount of pride is that 24% of our population are underrepresented minorities, and 1 out of 7 are first-generation college-educated kids. That's a remarkable achievement. And the average student will do 2 or 3 internships before she graduates. And I say she for a reason, because 75 to 80% of our students are women. So we're very, very proud of that. When they leave, they do okay. They do okay. So we did a study of the class of 2013. We were able to identify 83% of the students. Of the 83% of the students, get this, 95% had jobs within a year after graduating. 92% of them had jobs in fields where they wanted to be. They weren't just flipping burgers. They were working in our nation's top public relations and advertising and marketing. They were in Disney. They were at Warner Brothers. They were at Hill and Knowlton. So we don't do too shabby a job in placing our students. And the next challenge is to place them in places like Hulu and Amazon and et cetera. So let me just say a few things about what happens while they're here, between the time they get in and the time they leave. And while they are here, there are 2,400 students in journalism, in communication and public relations. We have about a dozen research centers, including the Norman Lear Center that some of you have probably heard of. We've started new programs like M2E, which stands for Media, Economics, and Entrepreneurship, because you've got to know more about economics moving into this crazy world that we confront. The Annenberg Innovation Laboratory has been cited as the place to visit when you're in LA and you want to know about innovation. And we have companies, IBM and Jaguar and Warner Brothers and France Telecom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on for hours and hours, so I will, being a professor. We're trying to break down the silos. We're breaking down the silos between journalism and public relations. No better example than what you see over here, the Converged Media Center, where people who do television broadcasting and radio broadcasting and public relations and technology sit next to one another to produce high-quality news. It's what we do here at the Annenberg School. I'll also have to say that we've been very lucky in being able to recruit 2 new wonderful directors. the director of the journalism school on one hand and the director of the communications school on the other hand. I'm very proud to say both are very, very accomplished women. Willow Bay has an extensive career in Huffington Post, in Bloomberg, in other forms of broadcast. A minor thing like an MBA from the Stern School, having worked in sports, having worked in financial journalism. On the communication side of the house, Sarah Benet-Weiser is a tremendous scholar. Her book several years ago won the prize in communication, and get this, as being the best book in the world in communication, which is not a terrible thing. So one of the things that we also have is great faculty. And we're really, really pleased to have Stacy Smith on our faculty. I was telling our special guest that when I travel around the country and a parent comes up to me and says, well, my daughter had a really great class, and I can't remember the professor's name, but she, and I said, stop right there. You're talking about Stacy Smith. She said, oh yes, that's the name. And they say that because she's a wonderful teacher. She's had a huge impact on the media industry because of the work that she does looking at gender and racial diversity. And she's just really a cool person. That's the main thing. She's just a really cool person. So with that, I would like to invite her to the stage to do a proper interview with a proper introduction to our very, very, very special guest. So Stacy, if you would do the honors.
What kind words, Ernie. Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here tonight to introduce someone who I think so highly of. Pat Mitchell holds many current positions. I want to just highlight a few. She's the chair of the Sundance Institute Board of Trustees, the founder and curator of TED Women, which I'll ask her a little bit about later on this evening. And she's currently co-chair of the Women's Media Center. Now, we could just stop right there, and that's a lot to take in terms of accomplishments. But I'm not going to stop there. Let's just talk about, I learned today that Pat likes to change careers every 7 years, so maybe put your seatbelt on. My introduction is going to go on for a while. She's the former president and CEO, and now advisor, of the Paley Center in New York, the former president and CEO of PBS, as the first woman, first journalist, first producer to hold that position. Now, if we just take a brief overview of Pat's accomplishments, they go on and on. She's worked for decades as a journalist, to be exact, 3 decades in broadcast news and in cable news. She's launched, hosted, and held a syndicated show called Woman to Woman. She's been on camera, behind the camera, as a reporter, an anchor, and a talk show host. Also, a White House special correspondent and producer. She has amassed more awards than even I knew about. So let me take you through a few of these. As an executive producer for documentaries and specials, she's achieved, through those storytelling platforms, 37 Emmy Awards for the content she has been involved with. I won't stop there. 5 Peabody Awards and 2 Academy Award nominations. I don't think Pat is traveling fast enough, to be perfectly honest. If we look to the notable distinctions she's received in the press and by different groups, Newsweek has called her one of the 150 women who shake the world. She's been noted by Fast Company in 2012 in the League of Extraordinary Women. She's received the Sandra Day O'Connor Award for Leadership, and the Huffington Post has called her one of the most powerful women over 50. She sits on multiple boards, and if you go to dinner with her and her lovely husband, you won't be able to keep up. If it's the environment, Africa, China, women, leadership, media, digital, you name it, they have cornered the market, both in terms of people working in the space and knowledge in the arena. I find her a leader, thoughtful, gracious, and kind. So it's not surprising when I sent out an email a few days ago asking some of her friends if they would help me introduce Pat Mitchell. She doesn't know this, which I love this part. I asked them a couple of questions about Pat's leadership. Carrie Putnam, the executive director of the Sundance Institute, said this about you, Pat. Pat's enormous energy and generosity create a powerful force that brings together and strengthens today's community of women in media. She's a true pioneer with an expeditionary spirit, and I admire her not only for her accomplishments, but for her curiosity, her passion, and commitment to social justice in all that she does. A dear friend to both of us, the CEO, let me jump down one, the co-founder of the Women's Media Center, a group you're closely aligned with, which we'll hear more about tonight. Robin Morgan says this: Pat Mitchell is simply the woman for all media seasons in talent, expertise, audacity, and experience. With a great brain and heart, my nickname for her is Tachyon, which in theoretical physics is a postulated particle that moves faster than the speed of light, as she does. And we know that this particle exists by the trail of light she leaves behind her, as she does. So true. This next one comes from both of our dear friends, Jacqueline Zahner, the CEO of Women Move Millions. Pat is the truest definition of a trailblazer, and through her long career in media, she has proved to be an unfailing champion for the power of media to enact social change, while being a steadfast advocate for the advancement of women and girls. She has masterfully blended the two, and in doing so, she has changed the world for all of us. And perhaps most notable is this last quote that came to me within 2 hours of sending it out. Gloria Steinem, the co-founder of the Women's Media Center, said, "You can see from Pat Mitchell's biography that she is creative and productive in diverse ways, from making documentaries to making decisions as a high-level executive. You may be able to see that she uses her talents to make the invisible visible, from Indian country to TED Women. But what is more difficult to put on paper is her embodiment of kindness and trust. Those two qualities make her welcome in very different worlds, because she is trusted by people at the bottom and the top, by social justice movements and current decision makers. She is a bridge that helps us understand each other." Tonight's distinguished Loper lecture will be given by someone that I respect and admire and am so privileged to be able to introduce in my career. Please join me in welcoming the incomparable Pat Mitchell.
Oh my goodness. You don't expect me to be able to talk after doing that to me. She has left me completely speechless. Stacy, what a wonderful gift to give people words from their friends. And what a great gift this is to be here with all of you this evening. Mrs. Loper, it's a real pleasure to be standing here under the James Loper Memorial Lecture. He was a role model, a mentor, and someone I admire deeply. So thank you for this honor. And of course, it's great to be in this building, beautiful new building that you threw together, Dean Wilson. And wonderful to be with you and your company again, too. It's much more pleasant when we're not battling all those battles together. But standing in this room, the Wallace Annenberg Center, I think of Wallace Annenberg, who also is a friend and a trustee emeritus of the Paley Center for Media, someone I've known for a long time, and someone whom I've always admired for the way in which Wallace has optimized the power of her resources, as well as her deep commitment as a powerful woman to making a difference in the world. And of course, by lending her name and her support and her advocacy to this great school on the USC campus, she is saying, as all of us know, that media is a very powerful force in our lives, and it is a force in which women are playing a part and have a much bigger role to play. So tonight, my subject is power, and it's very specifically women in power, and very specifically women media in power. Now, before you conjure up some image in your head or you head for the exit, because you've already decided this talk doesn't have anything to do with you, let me urge you to just hesitate for a moment and not let those images that come up when we mention the word power, and for women they're particularly complex and challenging images, but they're also often negative images in the heads of women as well as men, and I think in large part we have media to thank for that. But let me invite you tonight to expand your thinking about the concept of the power of media as well as the power of women and the men who love and support them. I want to reflect for a few minutes on a different definition of power and how we might use it, and if we are using it, use it in even better ways. Arguably, we are talking about the single most important force in the world for change. Media affects the way we live, work, think, and interact with each other. Now, I've placed cards around the room. Some of you picked them up. Some of you haven't quite known what to do with them. You'll notice that there is a quote about power on the front of the card inside a little thought bubble. And on the back, the thought bubble is empty. So I hope that you'll wait until the end of my comments to write your thoughts about power. But I would really like you to do that, and the Annenberg Center is going to help me collect them and see if we come up with some new definitions. I only chose 10 quotes. There are thousands of quotes about women and power on the internet if you wish to look at them. And I am interested in hearing what you have to say about that. I hadn't specifically decided to talk about public broadcasting tonight, but when I think about the power of media, I always think first about the importance that a powerful, strong, and sustainable public service media, broadcasting, radio, and television exist in this country. We only have one, and it's often threatened and often embattled, and it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that it is sustained and strengthened. And I want to come back to that in my comments later. But I want to invite you to go on a trip with me. I remember the very first time I saw this image. It was in one of those comic books that my father disapproved of my reading. My father, not surprisingly, was my image of power when I was a young girl. Wherever I looked in that small, rural South Georgia town where I grew up, I saw power as the man sitting behind the desk, the man standing at the podium, the man standing at the pulpit. Presidents are soldiers, principals are preachers. Power was defined by men. Until I discovered Wonder Woman. Now, the city council tried to ban these comic books from the library, but the town librarian wanted nothing to do with it and insisted that age-appropriate reading of Wonder Woman, as well as other superheroes, was good for young girls and boys. So at age 9, I opened the pages, and there were the images of a woman that I had never seen before. It wasn't just her costume, although I do admit to liking her costume. And I have to confess that last Halloween I actually bought a more modest, modern version of Wonder Woman, and there are pictures on the web, I'm sorry to say, of me wearing that costume, going trick-or-treating on Halloween with my grandchildren. And my grandchildren described it as colorful. Colorful, yes, but for a time, this was distinctly and daringly curvaceous. But let's not forget, maybe you don't know, Wonder Woman was created by a man. And if you look very carefully at a lot of the comic books and the television show that followed, he was something of a bondage fetish. The debate about Wonder Woman now, though, has resurfaced. Why? Because they're going to make a big screen, big studio Wonder Woman movie. And the debate was, who should direct it? Who should write it? All the other Wonder Woman television shows and comic books have been written and produced by men. Well, the good news is we can fast forward to 2015 and see that they've just selected a woman director, Michelle McLaren, who will be directing Gail Gadot, who is already, by the way, being criticized by some of the Wonder Woman fanboys as not having enough of the attributes. I don't think they're referring to her superpowers. But whatever she looks like, I'm interested in what the story is. Is there going to be a different kind of Wonder Woman in this movie? Is the nature of her power going to be more nuanced, less one-dimensional? Are we going to see her using her power for something really good? That's the power play that I want us to think about this evening. Because what we know for sure is movies, television, computers, phones, they show us every day what power looks like and what it acts like. And because most of those images are contributing to a stereotyped and one-dimensional concept, not to mention one sex and usually one race, definition of who has power, it's time now to take a closer look at who's making the definitions, writing the stories, producing the images, distributing the content. There are many factors at play. Some of them, though, are worth our looking at to find out why today are there no more women directors, writers, producers, animators, composers, cinematographers, editors, executives, and if there were more, would we be seeing different stories on screen, different images of power and leadership, and therefore different outcomes and impact? I believe the answer is yes. That's why I want to talk with you about it this evening. So let me just share a few facts very quickly. Only 4.2% of all the directors of the top 100 box office films from 2002 to 2013 were directed by women. Stacy Smith recognizes this research because it's hers. There are 41 female directors out of 1,100 films. Now think about that. 41 women directors out of 1,100 films over an 11-year period. There was no woman nominated this year for Best Director, in spite of the fact that Ava DuVernay directed a Best Picture-nominated film, Selma. There were no women nominated for any of the 10 screenplay slots, no women composers, no women cinematographers. Clout positions matter, and look at the small percentage of women who hold them. These are the positions where decisions are made about who's going to be the star, who's going to write the story, what's going to be the image, how much attention, how much promotion, how much distribution. Editors matter too. So why not? Well, in that study that Stacy Smith and her team led, and Sundance and the Women in Film and USC's Annenberg School, did a survey of independent filmmakers and executives to agree on, okay, what's going on? There are all these talented, wonderful women coming out of schools like this one. Why aren't they getting the big movies? Why aren't they directing the films or even writing and composing? Well, we know that there are financial barriers. In fact, Stacy's doing some additional research on that, which we're really looking forward to seeing. 43% of the funding structures are operated still by men. And traditionally, then, projects that come to these financing operations with women directors or women's stories, normally called chick flicks, are still considered more of a commercial risk, less powerful at the box office. But that's not true. Look at this. Oops, sorry. There we are. Those are the box office hits. Female-centric films like these, and like so many others we could have put up, do really well It's a myth that they don't do well at the box office. Women are willing to pay to see stories about strong women, and that's why these films surface to the top. But in spite of that reality, women still have challenges raising funds to tell their stories, even when their first project was hugely successful. So is this about less self-confidence among women directors, writers, or producers? That is what we often hear, by the way. They just don't walk in confident enough to convince anyone to give them the money. Or is it really a lack of confidence among executives and the funders, again, mostly men, who still haven't quite got the power of women as media consumers? Women hungry for stories about women. And then when given the chance to write, direct, produce, act in those stories, the results make money, they win awards, and they sometimes change minds. Academy Award-winning director Catherine Bigelow proved that women directors can direct any kind of story. They can take a story of war and make it as devastating and as powerful as any male director. Of course, I'm hoping on a future project she turns her amazing talents to adding dimension and depth to a story about women colleagues. So why does it matter? It matters on screen because of what we actually see. We're not seeing the stories about women leaders, women warriors, women artists, athletes, and yes, women superheroes. Last year, only 12% of the top 100 grossing films in Hollywood had female lead characters. Think about that. And that's a decline from the year before. We're not going in the right direction. And we don't fare much better in secondary roles. If any of you have seen Gina Davis's research, also informed by the great team that Stacy leads here at USC, you would also see that same percentage applies to women characters and lead characters on the small screen, episodic television. Another fact, women on screen are always younger than men. The majority are in their 20s and 30s, whereas men over 40 are more than 50% of the lead characters. Now, the good news here is women and men are aging better and living longer, as we know, and it didn't go unnoticed. These were the most photographed scenes, Golden Girls looking golden. Now, the research also shows that women directors, when given the story, are a lot more likely to feature girls and women of all ages on screen. So that makes a difference when 40% of the protagonists in films did come from stories written by women protagonists. It matters behind the scenes too. The differences extend way beyond what we're seeing because, again, films directed by women feature more women content creators, content distributors, cinematographers, editors. And in general, men and women are telling different kinds of stories. So a recent survey of 900 films from the independent sector as well as studios found that violence, guns, weapons, blood, gore, those are much more likely to be the storylines in plays and movies that are written by men. And when women are producing, maybe we'll see different kinds of stories. There are many that you and I could name as our favorites, and in almost every case, we would think so because there was a different kind of story. Now, I'm not suggesting that we take a wild ride over a cliff like Thelma and Louise did, or we shoot our boss like they did in 9 to 5. There are other ways for women to use their power on screen. But it would help if we could think of a way to use a little more imagination, a little more women's vision, and dimension and differences to the way that power is playing out. Why? Because it makes a difference in our real life. For example, consider how we think about leadership. One of the most measurable and potentially dangerous outcomes of the way that media is presenting power and leadership is the way it is playing out with young women and the way they think about leadership. A negative perception of power and the lack of aspirations to be a leader. A recent Princeton study showed that young women, more than young men, are taking behind-the-scenes positions, seeking to make a difference outside of elected office or campus groups, not asserting themselves as classes much. And when I read this Princeton study, I thought, this must be 2000, maybe even 1995. No, much, much more current. So current that just 2 weeks ago at a recent gathering I went to in New York of women of all ages talking about leadership, an astonishing number of the women under 30, the ones we were aspiring to take power into their own hands, said, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want power. I've seen the negative impact on women's lives. I've seen the way press treats women who run for office. I don't aspire to be a leader. Now, there are many reasons that factor into that. Work-life balance concerns, those are real. Family policies are not making that any easier. And recognizing raising children and having careers, all of this is factoring into a young woman's thinking about what path she takes and whether leadership figures into her plan. But there's no question when you push a little bit below the surface that a lot of the way they think about leadership has to do with the leaders that they're seeing in top jobs and running for office, and the lack of women role models in both. Now, I don't find this response in other parts of the world where I travel and work. There, women and girls have grown up with women heads of state, and also it's places where women cannot afford to sit on the sidelines or take a behind-the-scenes position. They have to be focused, if not only out of self-interest and personal survival, but on the future of their countries. They're not waiting to be rescued, they're leading. And in some of these places, women know if it's going to change, no one else is going to do it. It has to be up to them to claim their power and use it. The hurdles to leadership, though, of course, are still present in every sector. The countries that recognize this and that have created some of the policies that begin to help us fix the problem are the ones that have looked at family policies that align with the values that we see time and time again for women. And we see that when companies recognize that, they have bigger profits because parental leaves are encouraged and men and women are happier and children are healthier. Now, that's a story worth telling, and yet one that hasn't been told as often as it should be. We also know at the Sundance Institute and other places like that, there's a new commitment to finding logistical, really strategic ways to start to change these facts that we've been seeing. There's a very real commitment at the Institute to being sure that every lab, every workshop for young people who come out of schools like this one and are looking to go into the movie making and theater making and media making businesses have additional training and mentoring. And those workshops are usually 50-50. There's a gender balance. But as we're tracking them, which Stacy, again, and the research is doing here, it'll be so interesting to see whether that 70-30 percentage of the 70% of women who are here at this institution and the 30% who end up in top, powerful leadership positions is also mirrored in the 50-50% that go through the training and the workshops of the Sundance Institute, and whether they find their way to something even close to equitable representation in the media business. You have to be committed, as this institution is, to diversity, as the Sundance Institute and others are, to the power of storytelling from the perspective of the people who make the stories, read the stories, consume the stories. I leave the Sundance Festival every year a lot more optimistic about the movie business, saying, oh, those were fantastic stories that were being told. Because at the Sundance Festival, a large percentage of the films, deliberately and with strategic choices, are directed by women. Still, only 24% plus of the feature films, but nearly 50% of the documentary narratives. And this is going to change the concept of power and leadership as we're seeing it. Mentoring, encouraging young women to pursue and stay on their paths, making it easier for them to do so, improving access to finance, absolutely essential, and raising awareness of the problem. And it's a little bit depressing to realize that they're not doing any better in the technology sector. Here we think the young, the innovative, the future is being shaped. Regrettably, here, women in power and leadership are also missing, lagging behind all other sectors of business. This graph compares the top 150 Silicon Valley companies to the top 100 Standard & Poor companies across all industries, and it tells us, if you look at it, virtually all S&P companies have at least one woman on their board. Barely half of Silicon Valley companies do. And in the executive suite, half of the Silicon Valley companies have no women executives. 84% of S&P manages to have at least one. It's an astonishing number, surprising to me, especially given, again, women are 47% of the total workforce. So what makes these statistics and facts that I'm sharing with you so worrisome is that the picture of power that is shaped in that place, Silicon Valley, is a place where the future is being defined and redefined every day. Now, so the good news is that the story of misrepresentation, underrepresentation of women in media is changing. There's a new power of women. Young adult women, 18 to 29, are the game and power users of technology. In particular, social media. It's made for us, right? It wasn't invented by women, of course. There are no women in that billion-dollar boys Silicon Valley Founders Club, at least not yet. But everything about social media plays into our hands as excellent connectors and networkers. Women dominate the major social media sites. They are the new Rosie the Riveter on the internet. 76% of all Facebook users compared to less than men. Women are the power users actually on all sites: Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter. There's only one in which we're not. Can you guess which one? LinkedIn. Men do still outnumber women there. So social media is a platform, a new platform for us to redefine and use our power. If you look at all these internet stats, and I'm going to go very quickly through them, it's just pointing to one thing. We have a new form of activism. We have a new way to make our voices heard and our stories told. Social media has become one of the most effective ways that young women can launch meaningful social action. Ask her more. Remember that from the Oscar campaign? It was one of the 10 most used hashtags last year. Patricia Arquette accepts an Oscar and uses that time on global television to talk about equal pay for equal work. It was a viral moment, a moment that reminds us that the throwing away of any single moment of that kind of global impact is a waste, and to use the power of that moment for something other than your own glory, as she did at that moment, to use it to put an issue forward in a way that is undeniable. It struck a chord across the world and has suddenly pushed the equal pay, equal work debate right back into the headlines. And then there was the Like a Girl, which was an ad campaign from a commercial company. But again, one of the highest volumes of social media response. So people are responding to calls to action from social media. It is a platform for change. Online feminism has taken off and gained new strength. Young women are reclaiming the word, reclaiming the equal rights agenda. And in the democratized world of social media, they can. It's where the hope is. It's where a new voice and a new leadership is emerging. For example, last year, a group of young women online protested the photoshopping of girls' bodies in 17, and by the way, they got them to stop. in New York, a video put out by Hollaback, an organization founded by young women to end street harassment, just plays what happens to one woman walking a street one day in New York City. The video's been seen nearly 40 million times. Do you know about the Circle of Six? It's a new app that provides ways for young women and men to form a circle of supporters through this app, which helps prevent sexual violence and abuse. They can quickly connect to each other through the ways that the slide lays out. It's in 32 countries in less than 18 months with over 100,000 users. And they recently launched in India, where 44 million people have smartphones and have downloaded this app. Social media for social good. Crisis text line. Now, we all know that this is similar to the Circle of Six, but we know how much adolescents and young people rely on texting as a means of communication. So a group of women in New York got together and said, let's find a way to use texting to help. So here's how it works. You text 741 741 if there's a crisis. You're in a situation you can't avoid. You're scared, you're worried, you're depressed, you're suicidal. And a live trained crisis counselor responds in text. They have already saved lives, prevented rapes and violence. Social media using its power for social action. There is still a difficult and complex issue about all of this social media, however, and that is its ability to harm, the dark side, the cyberbullying, and the connectivity that brings us together and makes it possible for us to intervene in situations where help is needed has also shown the power of media can be used to diminish, belittle, betray, and in doing so perpetuates again the negative images of power, which is really where we began. With more women using social media now, though, with more women writing stories on the screen, the little screen, the big screen, more women directing, producing, filming, and editing, that will happen because of schools like this one. We'll have less of the negative dark side and more positive images of power and leadership. I believe that. I have no stats or data on this one. I just have belief, faith, passionate belief that the differences in men and women, from the differences in the way scientists tell us our brains are configured, to the differences in the ways our lives evolve, giving us differences in the ways we see and think, not better, not worse, just different, to the different challenges and opportunities that we face. These are differences that make a difference in the stories we tell and in the way we tell them. In the early days of television, I spent way too much time, as did all the women who worked with me, in trying to prove we could do the same jobs the same way as the men who were there before us. Frankly, I'm only focused on getting the same pay for the same jobs now. And in my travels around the world, getting to meet phenomenal women and the men who support them, they have so much less than we do. They struggle so every day on less than we throw away. I've come to truly understand and see power in a different way there, too. Both the power of women to be resilient, to overcome, to resist, to rebuild, to improvise, to innovate, to turn pain to power over and over and over again. And I've witnessed unspeakable abuses of power in those same countries, fighting wars over natural resources, often on the bodies of women and girls. And yet in those darkest and most difficult places, I've watched leaders emerge, men and women who claim power to use it differently, responsibly, with resilience and undaunted faith. There are many places in the world where women have to worry about a completely different kind of power, the power to just get away from violence. But we are now seeing that through media and technology, we're giving them new tools for empowering themselves and others. In Congo, there's a new cell phone. It has a special alert system so that when women go out into the woods alone, which they must do together would, they can push a button if they see militia nearby, and it warns all the women in the nearby area to go to safety. In Afghanistan, there is a new designed phone that allows a midwife in a rural village where there are no doctors to scan a woman's stomach and send it for medical instructions to a doctor thousands of miles away. I've seen these examples over and over again, particularly in the developing world, of people seizing the technology, understanding the power that exists in the phone in their hand or the computer or the internet connection, and understanding that is how they can change their lives. There's so many of those stories proving to me over and over again, the power of media is just too big to be used for harm or not to be used at all. Now that plus a long career in media, one that you've heard way too much about tonight, attempting though over that career to engage the power of media to tell stories that maybe others weren't, to raise awareness about the challenges that I faced, but mostly about the ones I saw around me, and to celebrate the accomplishments of women. I learned, as one of the power quotes on the cards I distributed reminds us, never let someone say no who has the power to say yes. I didn't always understand or fully embrace my own personal power as a woman leader in media. And for the first many years of my career, I didn't fully optimize my power as a leader for women. But observing now, close up, women on screen, behind the executive desk, and the power that is in our hands in both those places to influence, to form opinions, to change the way people think and live and interact, I began to see that power unused is power abused. That being a leader comes with a responsibility, and that responsibility to engage with the power is the true nature of power now, and it is defined by who has it and what they do with it. So in my new capacity as an independent consultant and advisor, I'm trying to direct that power that other people hold in their hands, that these media companies have, technology companies have, and each of us individually have, to claim it for the good that I've shared only small stories, but big stories happening all over the world. We're not going to all be president or leaders. We're not going to all become presidents or CEOs, and we certainly are not going to be Wonder Woman or some other superhero, but we don't need to be. To bring about change, we just need women and girls like these. President Sirleaf Johnson, President of Liberia, first woman elected to run an African country, and Malala, and others. Fearless in claiming their power and committed to using it, sharing it as the leaders that they are to empower others. And of course, we can't do it either as women if we don't have husbands, fathers, brothers, friends who support, encourage, mentor, and empower. But the one thing I know from listening to the class that Stacy invited me into today, to walking around this campus and having conversations with the students who are here, that they believe, they want to believe they have the power of media, leaving here with the education and the training, the colleagues, the networking. So if we leave here tonight or any other time we are together, understanding that every choice we make as a consumer or a user of media. Every word we text or blog or tweet, every story we share, we are sharing an idea that could, in fact, change the way people think or live or interact. That's why there is a school here, why there is an Annenberg Center, while understanding that it can't be one look at anything. Diversity begins with understanding the power. Diversity begins with understanding that media is a power that we all have in our hands. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll now write me your thought about power on the back of the card, and I'm going to have a conversation with Stacy in which we'll get to talk more about public broadcasting, which is still a deep passion of mine, and a power that won't last, that won't be strong without us, every one of us supporting it, and TED Women, which was a platform, again, that came about recognizing, as I tried to do within the organization, a platform for power, how to use it, how to optimize it to tell the stories of women. There are wonderful stories in this room because I know some of them. So I look forward to hearing your questions. Stacy? Thank you.
Pat, that was, oh, is this on? There we go. Pat, that was absolutely fantastic. And I love, I think, more than sharing my research, listening to my research. So beautifully articulated.
There was so much more.
But you did
So
a
much
phenomenal
more of it that I
job.
wanted to use. I spent hours reading your research. I knew about the part you had done for the Sundance Institute, of course, but there's so much more in it.
Right.
I mean, I hope that everyone gets to see it because you don't realize how really bad the numbers are. And
Right.
yet where the opportunities are so huge to start to switch those numbers. And, you know, this is the generation that you're educating here who will make that switch.
And I'm happy to provide copies for all of you at any moment. I think that some of the themes that were so interesting and compelling that you talked about were power, leadership, technology, and change, with women at the center. And so I think I want to start by asking you about something that really concretizes those terms, and that's TED Women. And so tell me a little bit about TED Women. How did it come about? Your founder, co-creator, curator of TED Women. Why is it important? Why do we need it? And the impact and quickening it's having as a distribution platform for the world in which we live.
There are several people in the audience who go to TED as well as TED team member. And I also had been going to TED and incredibly impressed every time by the speakers who were on the stage sharing ideas. And by and large, certainly in the early days, the large majority of those speakers were men. And as I began to go more often and pay more attention to that, and you know, I started to wonder, well, there's a wonderful nuclear scientist I know who's a woman. There's a doctor doing that research who's a woman. So I asked Chris Anderson, the very visionary gentleman who owns TED and is responsible for its impact. And he said, yes, we know there must be, and we'd like to figure out how to get to know more of them, because it is what happens is we tend to call on the people that we know and the community that we know. So I started in the beginning just by sending names of women to the organization, saying, well, how about this one? How about that one? And they, of course, make their decisions, but I was sending names and suggestions. And in 2010, the global narrative about women got really strong, you may remember. And it felt like if there were a time that we could set aside and say the majority of the speakers at this TED are going to be women, not all of them, but the majority, because if no matter what we're talking about, if it's farming, entrepreneurship, inventions, exploration, medicine, science, we're going to make a special effort to find the women who are doing that work or who have ideas to share. And that's how it started. We thought we'd do one, in 2010, and it was so well received that we decided to continue it, and we did, and this year will be the 5th one, 2015, in Monterey, and it is still 70% or so women speakers, 30% men. That's about the ratio in reverse at the other TED conference. And now, you know, people say, well, do we still need it? Is it becoming a ghetto, which is one of the questions that you start to ask. You know, is it becoming are we shuffling off all the women speakers to TED women? The answer is no, because what has happened is there are now more women speakers on the main TED stage. It just opened up the flow. It's one of the things about using, again, the power of media that you point out in the research. You put a woman director or writer, they're going to naturally increase the community of women who are there because they know them, for all kinds of reasons. But maybe we make a special effort to find them, and that's what we do on TED Women. We make a special effort to, no matter what the subject is that we think we should be talking about. But we have men too. This year, President Jimmy Carter is speaking, and a lot of other guys as well. And they actually turn out. You know, they don't come and talk about women. They come and talk about their ideas. And the women don't come to talk about being women. They come to show their power as a scientist or whatever sector it is in which they're accomplishing. So it's been a great learning experience for me. I really feel it's a privilege to do it. Hard work, but a privilege.
Now, I'm going to ask you just one or two more questions and then give people an opportunity to engage with Pat, because I could do this for hours, just if you want to be clear. But leadership is such a crucial issue with TED Women. You need women to step up and to say yes. And have you found that it's been difficult to curate and get women to take that risk and have the confidence and to be on the stage? Because from what I understand from you, this is a fairly rigorous process, and people live very complex lives that have to be juggled with work and family. Tell me a little bit about how you try to curate that talent and get them on the stage, and where is it sometimes difficult?
It was a challenge for the TED team altogether to get women sometimes to agree to do a TED Talk, even when they were invited, because a couple of things. We often, as women, we're the first to point to someone else. And we'll often say, well, you know, my colleague's doing more interesting work. Or my boss, maybe you should think about inviting him. That happened from time to time. Plus, women are often balancing, as we know, a lot of things at once, and haven't, and traditionally just felt that was maybe as important. But now, when they're seeing other women do this, and men as well, and the impact of it, I think the numbers of people who are saying yes. Not everybody does, though. As you know, I've had a lot of very high-profile women say, I just don't think I have an idea quite formed enough to talk right now, and I'm always surprised because I've never actually been told that by a guy, I have to say. But maybe that's because you grew up having to have your ideas more well-formed. Not sure. The other thing that is different is the community. There is a different sense of community at the TED Women Conference, I am told by people who come and who experience it. And that just has to do with maybe the audience being, again, a different mix. It's what I believe, again, about the differences we bring. If we all did everything exactly the same, if TED Women were exactly like TED, then why do it? But as long as it's a different global community, which at the moment it is, all over the world, as people watch us all over the world, then there's a reason for doing it. And if there's a different networking, collegial kind of experience that happens there, which it does, then that's important too.
Well, and thinking about difference and inclusivity and platforms, you can't have a conversation about the media and its historical influence without a conversation about PBS. You just can't in this country. And so in thinking about your presentation, I couldn't help but wonder, how is PBS doing? You were the first female president, CEO of that organization. Tell me a little bit about PBS, thinking about today, what happened, the succession plan. How is it posturing or leading in this arena? And maybe where's some room for improvement? Because we know the media, whether it's television, film, new platforms, they're so behind. So tell me a little bit about PBS.
Well, I think PBS has always led the way in almost everything, of course, but, and NPR. When I say PBS, I always want to say public service broadcasting because I believe that they're both so essential. One thing I'm very pleased about is that the succession was well done. And when I left the CEO position, there were many qualified candidates. But the fact that a woman succeeded a woman is always a good thing because it doesn't happen very often. And it's happening more because women are supporting each other in different and better ways. When I first took the job as the first woman, and many of you have been in this same place, I know, when you're the first, everything you do is judged a different way. Literally, I had a board member ask me once, "Are you running an affirmative action program for women here?" Because I'd hired 5 or 6 women in a row. And I said, I hadn't even noticed I'd hired 5 or 6 women in a row. I just hired the best candidates, which I had done. But I probably was making an effort to bring a different equity balance to the staff, which didn't feel very balanced because, again, who are we serving? A very diverse population, which is why media needs to be diverse, the biggest reason for the mission of the Annenberg Center and the school. So that has always been a very big part of public broadcasting stations all over the country, both radio and television, the commitment to diversity because those stations serve communities much more directly than the commercial companies who are often based thousands of miles away and are not run by local boards, local support, local citizens writing checks and expressing their support. That was the story for me that we don't tell quite as strongly as we could. I visited 359 stations when I was president, and I saw America at its absolute best. There is no other way to say it. When you go into a city and you visit the NPR station or the PBS station, you are seeing the best of that community, the best people, the best leaders. And on many of the instances, I think you'd agree with me, Ernie, the leadership of public broadcasting stations, both radio and television, is much more diverse than the leadership of the commercial media companies. I used to have a chart, which I don't have anymore, which showed how many women managers there were of those stations and how many ethnically balanced and diverse there were too. So I think the reputation of public broadcasting as a leader in diversity is intact and getting stronger. And it's a big part of the mandate.
Absolutely. Now, I don't want to be selfish with our time, and I want to open it up to questions that folks might have about your career, your interests, where you're going. So are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to engage Pat with? Yeah, and we have a microphone coming right.
Hello, Jackie Matthews. I'm an Annenberg alum, 2012. And I had a question that I thought of kind of midway through your presentation about how women get into the director, producer roles that you were talking about. And I don't work in entertainment, I work in communications and political consulting, so forgive me if this is an informed question, but the majority of my friends who get into entertainment go through agencies, WME, CAA, and those agencies have a reputation for being, very cutthroat, very backstabby, very petty, very tough places to work. And I think in your presentation it said that women really like to work in places that are collaborative and a sort of different environment. So my question is, are there ways to create alternative pipelines to get women into those positions of directing, producing that aren't through the agency life where those first 2 years of having to put in your time at that kind of place is not something that's very appealing to women off the bat, and so they go into other careers, and that's kind of where you take off, and it's hard to go back into those places. So,
Yeah, I think it's no surprise how many women end up being in the entrepreneurial part of whatever business they're in. In fact, in Silicon Valley, one of the things that wasn't on the chart but is very real is that there's an enormous number of young women creating new digital companies and media in Silicon Valley because they don't want to go in to the companies. They know in the company they're going to end up on the lower rank, and they're going to fight harder and harder to kind of move up. And we saw in the chart how hard it is to ever get to the management of those companies. But what happens is along the way they don't get the funding and they don't get the support, and then that's still a sad part of that story. But that's one of the things we're working on at Sundance and other places is improving that. But I'd have to say that for me, the biggest way we open up the pipeline in every sector is women opening the door for other women. And that's not as easily done as said, and a lot of people don't agree with me on this, so I recognize it's somewhat controversial, but I have found that it's the same thing where that if I open a door and I take a step up, I want to reach down and help a woman take the next step up. It's one person doing one job maybe, but help it just deciding, making it a commitment. It's the same kind of commitment that I know you have here that I had at the Paley Center. If you had a panel in there and it didn't have diversity, meaning women and ethnic diversity, you couldn't do it. I don't listen when people say, well, I just could not find an African American to talk about that. Or there just were no Latino experts on that. Or, there were no women scientists, I just couldn't find one. That is just not true. And the same way that they say, well, I couldn't find a qualified woman for that job. I'd always say to the search firms and the agents and the people who call up and have their favorite people, I'd say, no. And what today, as a board member, a corporate board member, I always say to the agents and the companies, don't bring us a list if it isn't ethnically and gender diverse. Just don't even bring it. We don't even want to look at it. So a lot of it has to do with when you get into a position that has any kind of power, any kind of leadership, to just make that commitment on an individual basis, that you personally are going to make that part of the way you use your leadership.
Great question. Yeah, over here.
You talked about women in social media and how it's a platform that's tailor-made for them. And this isn't maybe exactly an equal correlation, but the name that popped into my head a couple of times while you were talking was Marissa Mayer.
I'm sorry. Who?
Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo. And I just wondered if you have, I'd love to know your impressions of, do you think that that is a step in the right direction? And do you see her being able to do some of the things that you talk about with bringing women up and maybe equalizing things, at least a little bit in the near future?
Well, it's a great step forward that she got the CEO job. There had been one woman before Marissa at Yahoo as well. Here's something that the Marissa Mayer story is bringing up for me. And this is a research project. I'll give you Dr. Smith. Many, many times when women get to be CEOs, they often get to be the CEO in a troubled situation. They go into a company that is on the brink, having problems. Especially if you look at Silicon Valley and Carly Fiorini at HP. I mean, we could go Carol Bartz. We could go through the list. And then they don't totally fix everything right away. And then they are dismissed and let go. And then what happens? the next headline reads, well, women CEOs just can't make it in Silicon Valley, or just aren't strong enough, aren't tough enough, aren't smart. I mean, it leads to all the doubt. Then it feeds into that. So it's one of the, and yet, you know, what woman's going to walk away? Not very many, from the opportunity to lead, to take over a company. And we are great fix-its people, as we know. We love to fix things, which is why, by the way, we make good leaders. But sometimes it's broken beyond being easily fixed. And we're not giving CEOs in today's environment, our leaders in anything, political leaders or business leaders, we're not giving them enough time because of the short-term profit reporting and all of that. It's so difficult as a leader to make the turnaround fast enough. So I think Marissa is in that situation, and just as she was feeling a little more balanced and a little more stable, she now has a stockholder suit against the company. And I went through one of those last year. I'm on her competitive company, you know, AOL, but I am like her very much, and we know each other well. So I am rooting for her, and I think we all should be, because we don't. It's important again, as women, to support other women in those positions. But are you seeing that too, that there are more
Absolutely.
ending up in those jobs where, oh my gosh, this is really broken, let's go get a woman to fix it?
Yeah, it's funny. We're just writing about this right now in this report we're working on, in this glass cliff and the double standard with failure, right, for men and women. And so it really creates a problem when we encourage people to take risks and to not fear. When the consequences are gendered, though, it's a very troubling rhetoric, right, because of the double standard. I think we have time for one more question, right down here.
Hi, Joanna Massey. I spent over 20 years in Hollywood. I was very fortunate to be very senior, but I never made it into the C-suite. And so I wanted to be a CEO, so I left Hollywood and started my own media company and made myself CEO.
So did I, by the way.
Thank you.
Nobody else would make me president, so I made myself president.
Right, exactly. I'm so tired of it. I'm like, forget it. I've been a senior vice president forever. But here's my question. I'm wondering if you have any insight, because now I'm in the process of needing funding and I'm going to venture capitalists. I actually don't think it's a gender thing. I think it might be people just aren't funding media companies right now. But I'm getting a lot of people saying, wow, that's a really great idea, great media company. You know, if you were a tech startup, you know, if you were in the digital, they're being supportive while also saying, ooh, tough sell. So I was curious if you had any insight.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right about the media landscape is so transformational at the moment and changing so fast that there is a reluctance on the part of investors to some degree. But it's also it is in many ways a gender question, as we showed before, and as the research shows that most of the funding operations and most of the VC money is in the hands of male-dominated companies. But I think what's changing is the more women entrepreneurs are starting companies that are working, really rocketing, that starts to change. So part of it has to do with our having our own self-confidence to know that what we're doing is better and not better, but different and important, and going in with that kind of self-confidence. So I think you are caught a little bit in the VC disinterest in media, more interest in technology, but it's all cyclical, as you know, in this business. So.
Okay, I think that we are out of time, unfortunately, for any more questions. But Pat, your legacy, your advocacy, your activism, I know that I benefit from it every time I'm in a room, whether it's in DC, New York, San Francisco, LA. Your transformational optimization of your own ability to lead is really just not only awe-inspiring, but it's leaving a legacy that will impact generations to come. And as I said to my students today, every single one of them is in a better place because of what you've done with your life. So please join me in thanking Pat Mitchell for the Loper Lecture. Thank you, Pat.